right, so section 1.7 is going to be quadratic equations. And quadratic refers to any equation where you've got a square as your highest exponent. So you've got an x squared, you don't have a cube or anything like that, but you have to have an x squared in your equation. And so we see right here a quadratic equation can look at this form right there, where a, b, and c are numbers. And it doesn't matter if a is first. A is always going to be the number that is with the x squared. B is always the number that's with the plain x, and C is always the number by itself. And we need to know those numbers because to solve these problems, we're going to use the quadratic formula. You might have seen this before. There's a cute little song that kind of sounds like row, row, row your boat. And you can Google that or look for it on YouTube on there. You definitely don't want me to sing it for sure. That would sound horrible. To kind of help you remember this. And we're going to talk through it as well. So one key thing that is probably the hardest step is in order to use the quadratic formula, the equation has to be equal to 0. And this usually means we need to do some work to do that. So that's probably like the most important step, but it's the one that gets forgotten the most as well. And then second, when we use the quadratic formula, we can get two answers. So we're going to talk about how to know what our answers are in real world situations. If we're just solving a non-word problem, like solving for number 1 here, we can totally keep our two answers. But when we have real world problems, like my example 2 there, a word problem, we're going to have to think about really if both those answers work or not. All right, so let's practice using this quadratic formula. So this first one, not a word problem, just a straight solving. My first step is I have to have this equation equal to 0, and it is not equal to 0 right now. This is a step that I said a lot of people forget. So I need to make it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. That's going to give me 2x squared minus 7x minus 5 equals 0. Now I can do the quadratic equation, or sorry, the quadratic formula. You have to have the equation set equal to 0. So a is 2, b is negative 7, the entire thing, that negative included, and c is negative 5. So I'm going to plug into my quadratic equation to figure out what x is. So I'm going to get negative b, that's a 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. Now, a couple things. I would make sure every single time, this isn't me being paranoid or anything like that, you need to put negative numbers in parentheses all the time. So that negative 7, I put in parentheses. The negative 5, I put in parentheses as well. We need to make sure and do that. Also need to check on your calculator that you're getting the same answer that I'm getting. So make sure that you know how to type this in. I'm going to do it in a couple stages. So negative 7 on the outside is going to give me 7. Plus or minus, if I type in everything that's underneath that square root, that gave me 89 all over 4. I like to do mine in stages. Now you might have been thinking, and I haven't addressed it yet, what this plus or minus is. Those are our two answers. We can have 7 plus the square root of 89 over 4. X can be equal to that. And x can be equal to 7 minus the square root of 89, all of that over 4. So we're going to type that in our calculator. Type the numerator in first. So type in 7 plus the square root of 89. Get that answer. It's going to be some crazy decimal, and then divide that by 4. And my directions say I'm going to round to 3 decimal places. So that is going to give me 4.018 and then negative 0.680. So those are my two answers. And I can keep those two answers because I can have up to 2 answers. So let's do the same thing down here with this word problem for example 2. So I've given you this whole equation about the number of multi-generational houses there. And the H is the number of houses in millions, and X are the years after 1940. We want to know what year it was, so that means I'm going to be solving for X. So I'm going to use the quadratic formula to do that. So I'm just going to write my equation down here, and I'm going to set it equal to 50 million. So my equation I'm going to set equal to 50 million. You cannot just jump straight into the quadratic formula for these problems. You've got to do this first step. Biggest mistake people make. First step is to get it set equal to 0. You can't just set it equal to 0. You got to do a little bit of algebra here because there was a 50 because of that 50 million. So I'm going to subtract this 50 off. If you don't do this, a lot of times you end up with crazy things going on. Your calculator might tell you there's like an error, you can't solve it, and that's because you've missed that first step. So subtracting 50 from both sides changes that C value. So now I have my A, my B, again don't forget that negative sign like before, and also my C has a negative sign. And I'm going to plug that into the quadratic formula. Maybe zoom in a little bit to give myself some space, because this one's going to be, all these decimals are going to be nasty to write out. No fun typing in your calculator either. So it's going to be B squared minus 4 A C, all of that over 2A. Up in the numerator part, I'm going to get that 0.583 plus or minus. When I typed in the square root, I didn't round. I'm going to do the whole thing. We're not going to round to the end. I got that 1.024993, and then I typed in the bottom part. Now we're going to get two answers. I'm going to try to squeeze them on here. We're going to get the positive and the negative. So we're going to have 0.583 plus our square root. And we're going to have 0.583 minus our square root. Well, it's a red there, so I'll change colors here. So if I type in the plus one, I'm not going to worry too much about the decimals here. It's going to come out to be 66.475 and some other things. And then for this negative, when I type it in, I end up getting a negative answer. Well, let's think about this in terms of like real world stuff. We asked what year, coming back up here, it said in what year did this happen? We can't have negative years. No one ever says I was born in negative 93 or something. That doesn't exist. We can't have that. So when in this problem, I'm going to throw this answer out because years have to be positive. So this one is going to be my only answer. So I only get one answer. You can have 0, 1, or 2 answers. So I can't say you're always going to get one answer. But they do have to make sense. We can't have negative years. So we've looked at a problem like this before, but when I've got this 66, my direction said it was after 1940. So I'm going to have 1940 plus that 66. I'm going to have to scroll down here to the next page here. Is going to give me the answer of 20. Oops. I wrote a 6 instead of a 0. Of 2006 there. So my final answer is going to be 2006.